Hello, Professor. First of all, I would like to thank you for your time and interest in my interview. I will have some questions regarding your own experience and regarding the European Union and today's immigration policy. My first question will be about your own experience. Could you tell me a little bit about your journey from Eastern Germany to Western Germany? How did you and your family decide to leave the Eastern Germany?
This year it's exactly 60 years ago that the Berlin Wall was built, which finally closed any possibility to move from east to west. There was no desire to move the other way around from west to east. We did it 1 year before it was finally closed. At that time in 1960, when I was 6 years old, the borders between the GDR, East Germany, and the West were already closed, with the only exception between the two parts of Berlin, between East and West Berlin. The fiction was still that the four allies of the Second World War would manage the whole of Berlin together, so that this was the only hole in the Iron Curtain for Easterners to get out of the GDR. And just before the wall was built in 1961, 40,000 per month used this hole in the Iron Curtain. It was simply a disaster for the GDR. So we were part of this movement which led 2 or 3 million of the 16 million of East Germans to leave. We left in March 1960 then, a couple of weeks before I had to go to school. That was a decisive moment for my parents, because from starting to go to school, children were obliged to learn to lie. What was right at home was not right at school, and vice versa. And this was, of course, a psychological stress for the whole family. And there were sanctions if teachers at school found out that you were listening at home West German or Western TV or radio or so. My parents got several times in trouble with the East German police before we left, because we at home were looking, or we had not yet TV, but we were listening to West Berlin and West German radio stations. My father was classified as politically not reliable. That was an official category. If you did not comply with the rules, the advices, the orders of the Communist Party, you had no access to any further higher education. You suffered from a lot of sanctions. For instance, you didn't get a place for holidays on the Baltic Sea or such things. So for my father, it was a deadlock in his education, in his career, in his political and personal life. And my parents feared that I would be submit to a communist education at school while we were free from communism, so to say. In fact, Christians at home. That were the motives. So when my parents decided to leave, they couldn't tell it to anybody except my grandparents. They were the only people who were informed. All the others believed that my parents were in holidays. And that's what they told me too. They told me that we would go to Berlin for visit of great royal parks with huge fountains and such things which enthusiasm childs. That would be indeed the royal parks of the royal castles at Potsdam, which I saw for the first time 30 years later, when the wall was open. They did so because the police, the East German police, took apart parents from children when controlling in Berlin at the borders, which happened not to all of the people traveling from east to west in Berlin, but sometimes it happened. And when the children knew what the travel was about, the police got it out of them. So to make sure that I couldn't say what we were up to, I was only informed about royal parks and beautiful fountains and castles. It's only in Berlin West that my parents told me, and what if we do not return? If we stay here, if we go to West Germany? The legend will that my answer was, as a child of 6 years, okay, I agree if my grandparents will join us. I loved them so much that I would not agree on leaving them definitely. They could indeed leave 1 year later, just before the war, officially, because my grandfather was then retired. And the GDR was not interested in retired people because they did not contribute any longer to any economic output. So they let go retired people. I had already an aunt, the sister of my mother, who died last year, whom I loved very much, in Hanover. We got, as everybody who flew from the GDR, a flight for free from West Berlin to any part in West Germany, in the Federal Republic. West Berlin could not, of course, deal with all these East German immigrants all the time. They had to be distributed over West Germany. If you had parents, as we had with my aunt, you were allowed to join them. We lived for several months in a one-room apartment together, all the four of us, my parents, my aunt, and me. All the others who had no parents in the West were obliged to stay in camps until they had got a job and a place where they could go to. So there were camps, hugely overcrowded camps of refugees from the GDR. We narrowly escaped. My parents feared that we had to go there too. But since my aunt was ready to share her one-room apartment with us for an undetermined time until my parents would find jobs, we were not obliged to go to such a camp. So that was the conditions under which we started. Of course, in order to show, to give no sign, to be precise, that you would leave definitely, you couldn't take anything with you. In Berlin, traveling from east and west to west with public transport was possible, as I said, but you should not give any sign that you wanted to stay in the West. So we left with just a handbag and nothing else, and had to start at zero in the West.
Okay, thank you for your response. And you've moved to West Germany as a child, and how was your experience as a child in the West Germany? And how did you and your family adapt to a new family in West Germany? Did you feel welcomed, or did you feel excluded in West Germany as a child?
As a child, I did not feel excluded. At the age of 6, all what was important for me was to be with my parents. So wherever they went, as long as I could stay with my parents, everything was fine. I'm sure that it is a huge trauma for children to be alone in such a situation. You lose all your other references in physical and in mental terms if you are alone. But as long as you are with your parents at that age, you are not yet so much linked to other things outside the family at the age of 6. What really matters is your parents. So I felt fine. I have no bad memories of that time. I had to go to school in Bremen, a North German port city, as you hopefully know, because I love Bremen still, since it has become my real hometown then. I remember among the many moments I remember, there's one which is strange. I talked to other children in my first class just when we arrived. I had to go to school. And as a child from East Germany, I was surprised about the very big ocean steamers, ocean ships I saw on the river from the Bremen port. And I told my fellow children at school, there are very big ships on the river. And I was convinced that I told it in very clear German, but they didn't understand me because my dialect was so different from theirs. So I repeated the sentence because I really did not understand why they didn't understand me, but they still did not understand. So we speak very different dialects in Germany. And this was at first an obstacle or a barrier of understanding, of understatement. Soon overcome. Then a couple of months later, my parents criticized me because I was speaking such an arrogant German, they said. That was simply the dialect of Bremen I had adopted from my fellow pupils, which compared to the dialect of our home region is rather, well educated, say, or it sounds arrogant. It is not at all. It is simply the regional dialect. My parents never lost the dialect of their home region. It was a sort of identification for them to speak still the dialect of their home region, which for them always was their home region. My home region became Bremen, and I'm still a supporter of the football team of Bremen since 60 years, one of the truest supporters since then. For my parents, this was much more difficult to adapt, of course. When we arrived, the so-called German economic miracle was underway. The West German economic miracle, that is a recovery of the German economy, not only at the level of before World War II, but far beyond. So the 60s were really a golden age for growth and employment. This facilitated, of course, the immigration and the immersion of East German refugees, as much as, despite these differences of dialects, the common language did. Finally, we spoke German, all of us. But we were not very welcome, or refugees at all were not very welcome. They were competitors for jobs. They wanted to make their way, to find their place in a society which had already accepted, after the war, approximately 12 million refugees from the East German regions lost to Poland and to the Soviet Union, and from Czechoslovakia. All the Germans in East Central European states were expelled after World War II. And nearly all of them, most of them, didn't want to stay in the GDR, in a communist country. They moved to the West. And in addition to these huge waves of refugees, immigrants, came these 2 to 3 million East Germans. So it was really a large share of the German population which was on the move during and especially after the war. 15 million out of, at the time, 60 or so. So a huge wave or several waves of migrants. And it is inevitable that this caused unrest. already those who moved from the East, from the Far East at the end of the war, that is the destiny of the family of my wife. Her parents came from East Prussia at the end of the war. They were not very welcome on the farms. They ended up in North Germany neither. They were additional eaters. There was not enough food for everybody. When we came, this problem was over, but there was another wave to accept, to digest, speaking another dialect, having other mentalities, other educations, who wanted to make their place and their path into this society. And this did not went without conflict.
Thank you. Today, Europe still is a popular place for many immigrants, many refugees, and in the Cold War years, the Western Europe was home to refugees and immigrants from the communist countries. Do you think that it was easier to adapt to the Western Europe when you are from the Eastern Europe communist countries? Because today one of the main problems about the refugees and immigrants from the North Africa, from Middle East, from Caucasus, they feel excluded from society and they cannot be integrated to the society. Do you think that it was easier to integrate to society in the Cold War?
Well, Europeans share many features of a common culture. They are very different from one country to another, from one region to another, but they have a lot of things in common. And that facilitates, of course, moving around in Europe. And this is a long-standing experience with Europe. Take all the waves of migrants during asymmetric industrialization. There was one huge movement of Poles to West Germany, to the Ruhr region, when it was industrialized. There were Poles who knew about mining and jobs which go along with mining for coal, for instance. They adapted rather well in the Ruhr region because they were Catholics, as the people living in the Ruhr were. A lot of family names in the Ruhr region stem from Polish origins. At the point that in the 90s or 80s, there was a saying which said, when the German national football team plays in Poland, nearly all the players can sit with their families. And you heard it in their names. There were so many Poles of Polish origin. It didn't cause really a problem in a Catholic region to accept other Europeans, Catholics too, from other European nations. So this did not cause so much problems. It did too, but the size was limited. Similar things with the migrants in the 50s, 60s, and 70s from Southern Europe, Italians, Spaniards. The Turks, which were invited to come to Germany from 63 on, from the early 60s, approximately at the same time when we moved to West Germany. That is in this golden age, when there was a need for workforce, when there was full employment. So to some extent, our destiny, this is the first time that I think this idea is similar to the Turks who came to West Germany. The Turks were more isolated. They were invited as workers, but not really as parts of the society. So they lived their lives apart from the German society, at least the first generation. When we moved to Berlin in 1991, just after the end of the Berlin Wall, the social structure of the city was still approximately the same as during the war. And I was director of a European education institute close to the former borderline, which was for West Berlin a marginal part of the city, because it was close to the end of the world at the war. And in this marginal part of Germany, there was a lot of Turks living. It was at the time a Turkish community of 130,000 people. And they were not the big problem for the society in Berlin. They were they didn't cause much problems for the others, and they had no so much problems among themselves, because they were living in a community big enough to feel at home in their community. They had acceptable living standards. They had good magazines, shops. They drove accurate, moderate, even luxurious cars. They did their business with themselves. So it was to some extent a parallel society with transitions, of course, a parallel society, but not an ill society, not an underdog society. It was an honorable society as an exclave, so to say. This changed over the last 30 years with more immigration and with the requirement not only of immigration, but of integration, with all the problems which come along. And I think that is natural. Problems are proportionally growing with the cultural gap. The farther you come away from the farther you come away, the greater is the cultural gap. That is something normal and inevitable. The question is how to deal with such a problem.
Thank you. Since you talk about the immigrants in Turkish immigrants in Germany, about the immigrants in Europe, main argument is that the immigrants are a threat for European Union's stability and development, and they harm the European Union's economy in the long term, from the far right parties side. And Uğur Şahin, CEO of BioNTech, and Özlem Türeci are Turkish immigrants, and they contributed to Germany and European Union with their studies. And there are many other successful migration stories in Europe. Do you think that stories like Uğur Şahin or Özlem Türeci could change the minds of European citizens, or is immigration always going to be a threat for European citizens?
The evaluation, the assessment of what immigrants mean for the German or the European society diverge largely. So officially still, at least in Germany, it is not the populist right-wing version which dominates, but just the other one, saying that we need immigrants. They are younger, they are dynamic, they contribute to our social welfare by doing their jobs, by paying their taxes and their insurances for healthcare, for pensions, for unemployment. So the demographic argument is we need immigrants, otherwise we are an aging society and will no longer be able to sustain our own social model. You are right that at the other end of the political spectrum, there's just the opposite idea. We should not accept immigrants because it is, I hesitate to express this idea because I didn't share it or I don't share it. But the idea is that they destroy our cultural identity. Well, We all lived all the time with immigrants, with migrants. There was never a society which was pure in this cultural sense or any other. And it doesn't mean anything. We are diverse. But apart from my opinion, there are these two stances. Some people say we need immigrants. Other people say they are not welcome. My criticism with both arguments is that they focus only on us and our interests. We would have loved the GDR change and stay at home, especially my parents. My parents left her home region, her family, her friends, with tears in their eyes. They didn't love to leave. And I suppose that this is still right for most of the refugees, for immigrants who would very much prefer to live a decent life where they are born and where they belong to, with their own cultural identity. And this is an argument or a consideration which gets totally lost in our Western European immigration policies. I feel we should do much more to enable other people to live a decent life where they live. That is the real task. All the more so, since I am convinced as a historian that we Europeans are largely responsible for the disasters which surround us in other countries. People move to Europe because we Europeans left other parts of the world after decolonization in a state of distress and disaster, or pushed them into such a state. So in my eyes, if there is a problem with immigration, it should not be solved. Well, once it has occurred, it must be solved on the spot here. But more important would be to eliminate the origins of migration, to make peace elsewhere where people come from, to contribute to a sustainable development in the regions people have to flee from because they have no future there. They don't want to come here. They want to have a decent life themselves where they are. And we Europeans should assume our responsibility for helping them to get that.
And the European Union's neighborhood policy actually aims the things you say that in the regions of the neighborhood of European Union, if there can be a development, there can be economic stability, democratic stability, it can stop the migration flow from the North Africa, from Middle East to Europe. Do you think that is it possible to stop the immigration flow from the surroundings of Europe with the neighborhood policy? And I will add one quick little question. And in the membership process of Turkey, one of the major barriers of Turkey's membership is that its surroundings, Turkey's neighbor to Middle East and Caucasus, and these regions are unstable, and they are a threat for European Union with their immigration flow. Do you think that this neighborhood policy could solve the crisis of immigration flow and could enable the European Turkey's membership to European Union with stopping immigration flow?
The European neighborhood policy was launched at a moment when Europe's trust in itself as a soft power and the trust in soft power as a real power was still much less questioned than it is today. So it was the idea, the trust in the European model to be a convincing perspective for other countries too. The idea was, if we open the way to surrounding countries, to neighbors, if we help them on the way to the European way of life, then we will do the best for them and we will improve their situation. This trust in the Europeans to be a model for others, I do not say that it has become obsolete, but it is no longer unquestioned. Take the relations with Russia, which is a big problem, of course, as you know. The Russian path of development does not hint in the same direction as the European one. It's a different one. So neighborhood policy should no longer be, and I feel it is no longer considered to be the same approach for all the neighbor regions around Europe. Ukraine, Russia, the countries east of the Black Sea, Georgia especially, have a different destiny than the Mediterranean countries. So I feel that first we should differentiate between several different regions neighborhood policy is aiming at, because they deserve different approaches. With regard to Turkey and its external relations or its neighbors, you have two opinions in Europe, and I will tell you the one I share. The one is indeed that one you outlined a minute ago, telling the Europeans that we do not want to get in touch with such unstable neighbors like Syria, Iraq, and Iran. Let this be far away. If we get Turkey as a member inside the EU, it is no longer far away. It is our borderlines. So we don't like this scenario. We want to push them back, and Turkey as a buffer state, so to say, is welcome outside the EU. Then the problems with borderlines between Turkey and Syria are not ours. This is turning the phenomenon as an argument against Turkish membership. But you can turn it just the other way around, saying that Turkey has these borderlines with very unstable regions, failing states, or dangerous states, or even crazy states, as long as Turkey is not a member of the EU. We Europeans have no say in how to deal with these neighbors. It's only Turkey. So we have no impact, no influence on these borderlines. It's not ours. We can't do anything about dealing with these borders. And they may then destabilize Turkey as a solitary country outside our reach. Let us integrate Turkey in the EU, and then we can together, and we Europeans can have an impact on these borderlines directly. We must help Turkey to manage them. Otherwise, they will come ever closer to us. My option is the second one, the more courageous or offensive one, future-orientated in my eyes. So, but I agree, I accept that you can turn the argument to both sides, and you have to evaluate what is more advantageous or more dangerous. There are advantages and dangers in both of these two scenarios. My evaluation is that the advantages are greater if Turkey becomes a member, and the dangers are smaller than if Turkey stays outside. And we have no impact, no say. We can help in no way to deal with these borders and have an impact on these regions.
Okay, my last question will be about again about Turkey's membership. In the Brexit campaign, in the history of Turkey's membership process, United Kingdom was one of the main allies in the main allies of Turkey in European Union. They were in favor of Turkey's membership, United Kingdom, and when the Brexit campaign started, main argument of Vote Leave was if Turkey was going to be a member in 5 years, and with the Turkey's membership, with Turkey's 80 million population was a danger for United Kingdom, and they had to leave the European Union before Turkey enters into European Union. And because Turkey, with its 80 million population, was a danger of immigration for United Kingdom. Do you think that Turkey is a danger for European Union with its population and with its possible immigrants in the future?
On Brexit, I have a very tough opinion. It was the craziest move of any post-war European government. I share the assessment of one of the most reputed British historians whom I listened to in Brussels a couple of months ago, and who said, and I quote, "This was the most irresponsible decision since 1936. That is the Munich Accords, when the British and the French agreed on the Nazi occupation of Czechoslovak territory." And that's a very tough comparison, but I share it. So I would not argue with British arguments in this case. They were in favor of enlargement every time, because enlargement in the eyes of the British would weaken the European Union. Well, that is not our aim in the European Union, to weaken ourselves by enlarging, of course. So this argument has no value in my eyes. Let's enlarge so that the EU gets weaker. The question is how we can still, in the EU, have the capacity to decide, to deliver as a political system that is taking decisions, despite becoming all the more diverse with enlargement. Under these criteria, is Turkey a threat? I share the idea which was around at the moment of the big enlargement in 2004, shortly after the European Commission in 2005 recommended to open accession negotiations with Turkey, when everything was hopeful about more enlargement. I share the idea which was around at that time. We need to strengthen the European Union. At the time, the way of strengthening the European Union was to implement the constitutional treaty. And as soon as we are strengthened enough, as soon as our bonds are tight enough, as soon as we agreed on a constitution, as soon as citizens and political system have reached an understanding of each other, as soon as there is an identification stronger than now between citizens and EU, then we can accept Turkey too. Because Turkey then would be indeed a member state, as in a federal union, which may be very diverse. By the way, if I may, an anecdote, since you asked me about my own personal experience. As a child, I was convinced, my parents very often told me, that there was Germany and Bavaria, and that Bavaria was a different thing and not Germany. And to some extent, as a North German, I still stick to this idea. So diversity is not a threat. It can be turned into a rich resource. And Turkey, with its huge historical experience as a leading nation of a 1,000-year-old empire reaching far over the Mediterranean, would be a precious partner within the EU if we can, again, turn this diversity into a wealth of resources, of historical experiences, of attitudes, of ways to deal with other regions and countries. And all these are all things Turkey would bring in. So once again, it is more a question of an attitude turned towards trust in yourself and courage for the future than in an objective evaluation. I feel that Turkish membership, no doubt, would bring a lot of problems to the European Union, but more opportunities than problems. So I do not deny the problems we would have. I do not deny them. But in the end, you must say yes or no. And that obliges you to evaluate problems against advantages. And my evaluation is 51 to 49 in favor. So I say yes.
Okay, Professor. That was all my questions. Thank you for your time and interest in my internship. It was a really great honor to this interview with you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your interest in my experiences and opinions.
It was a great pleasure to listen to you and hear your stories from your side. Thank you.
Thanks to you, Batukan.